After 10 years of groundbreaking research under my direction, I'm proud to announce that Revitalize Pharmaceuticals has developed the first effective treatment for Geller's syndrome. Dr. Richard Harlow announced to the crowd of medical journalists, pharmaceutical executives, and FDA representatives gathered in the hotel ballroom. This devastating neurological condition has been a death sentence for the 5,000 Americans diagnosed each year. Today, that changes. I stood at the back of the room, clipboard pressed against my chest like armor, watching the man who had spent less than 10 hours in our actual research lab take credit for my life's work. The molecular structure projected on the massive screen behind him, the one he was gesturing to with such confident authority, had been sketched on a coffee shop napkin during my second year of postdoctoral research, long before I'd even joined Revitalize. My name is Dr. Eliza Kwan, and this is the story of how a revolutionary medical breakthrough, and the system that almost buried it, changed far more than just the lives of Geller's syndrome patients. The brilliance of compound RVT 773, Harlow continued, using the corporate designation rather than the molecular name I'd given it, lies in its ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and selectively inhibit the protein misfolding that triggers neurodegeneration in Geller's patients. A medical correspondent from The Lancet raised her hand. Dr. Harlow, the molecular mechanism you're describing is remarkably similar to Dr. Kwan's published theoretical work from her time at Johns Hopkins. Was her research a starting point for this treatment? Harlow's practiced smile didn't falter. Dr. Kwan is a valued member of our extended research team. Her early theoretical models provided some interesting avenues to explore, though they required significant refinement to become clinically viable. Some interesting avenues, refinement. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my expression neutral. What he didn't mention was that the extended research team consisted almost entirely of me and 3 dedicated lab assistants working 80-hour weeks in a basement lab, chronically underfunded until our breakthrough made the treatment too promising to ignore. Could we hear from Dr. Kwan directly? Asked the journalist, scanning the room. Dr. Kwan is more comfortable in the lab than in the spotlight, Harlow answered smoothly. She's actually already back at Revitalize, working on the next generation of the compound. Science never sleeps. The lie was so brazen I almost laughed. I was standing less than 50 feet away from him, deliberately positioned in the back where marketing thought I wouldn't be noticed. But the journalist's gaze found me anyway, recognition flickering across her face as she spotted the name on my badge. I gave a small nod, confirming her suspicion, and watched as she made a note in her tablet. The seed was planted. After the presentation, as Harlow was surrounded by pharmaceutical executives, discussing distribution rights worth billions, I slipped away to the hotel bar. My phone lit up with a message from Deepak, one of my lab assistants. Did he at least mention your name this time? I typed back, as a member of the extended research team whose work required significant refinement. Bastard, when do we activate Phase 2? I smiled at the message. Phase 2. It sounded like something from a spy movie, but it was actually a carefully planned strategy devised in the darkest moment of our research journey, the day Harlow had tried to remove me from the project entirely. Tonight, send the package to Lydia Chen at The Lancet, the one with EVE Ragiting. I ordered another drink and pulled up the secure cloud folder on my phone, the one that contained our insurance policy. For 3 years, I had documented every step of our research with obsessive precision. Lab notes, molecular modeling simulations, clinical trial data, and correspondence. But most importantly, I had evidence of Harlow's systematic attempts to minimize, claim, and eventually eliminate my contributions. There were recorded meetings where he couldn't answer basic questions about his breakthrough molecule, emails where he admitted not understanding the core mechanisms but insisted on being listed as primary researcher, documentation showing how research funds were reallocated to ensure his name appeared prominently in clinical trial protocols. And then there was the smoking gun, his explicit directive to remove my name from the patent application, followed by his recommendation for my reassignment to a different department once the treatment proved successful in Phase A trials. What Harlow didn't know was that I had filed for a separate patent 9 months earlier, not for RVT 773 itself, which legally belonged to Revitalize, but for the entire class of molecules based on my original theoretical model. a model I had published before joining the company, which gave me certain intellectual property rights that Revitalize's legal team had overlooked in their rush to claim ownership of everything. The Lancet journalist, Lydia Chen, appeared at the bar beside me, ordering a sparkling water before turning in my direction. Dr. Kwan, I thought you were back at the lab, making scientific history, she said with a wry smile. Apparently I'm capable of being in two places at once, another breakthrough Dr. Harlow will no doubt take credit for. She laughed, then lowered her voice. Off the record, that presentation was a scientific travesty. He couldn't answer half the technical questions without deferring to notes that looked suspiciously like they were written in someone else's handwriting. Mine, actually, I confirmed. He has a habit of having me prepare his talking points, which he then reads without understanding. Would you like to set the record straight? She asked. The Lancet would be very interested in the actual science behind this breakthrough. I glanced toward the ballroom, where Harlow was still holding court, basking in the acclaim for my work. You'll be receiving a package from my lab assistant, I said carefully. Everything is meticulously documented and can be independently verified. But there's more at stake here than just scientific credit. Such as 5,000 Jeller's patients per year in the U.S. alone. Revitalize plans to price the treatment at $850,000 per patient. But my broader patent could allow for generic manufacturing at a fraction of that cost. Her eyes widened. That would be billions in lost revenue for Revitalize. And thousands of lives saved who couldn't afford the treatment otherwise, I added. That's what really matters to me. The next morning, I arrived at Revitalize's research campus to find an unusual flurry of activity. Security guards I didn't recognize stood near the entrance to the executive wing, and there was a tension in the air that reminded me of the day our phase II trial results had been unblinded. My lab keycards still worked, which I found vaguely surprising. I half expected to have been locked out overnight. My team was already there, looking nervous but determined. It started, Deepak said quietly as I entered, nodding toward his computer. On the screen was the front page of the Lancet's website, featuring a breaking news story. Questions emerge about Revitalize's revolutionary Jeller's treatment. Who really developed RVT 773? The article was comprehensive, citing multiple sources within Revitalize who confirmed that I had been the primary researcher and developer of the treatment, with Harlow taking credit despite minimal involvement in the actual science. But more explosive was the revelation about my separate patent application, which threatened Revitalize's exclusive control over what analysts were already projecting as a $4.2 billion annual market. My phone began ringing almost immediately, first Revitalize's legal department, then the head of PR, and finally Harlow himself. I let them all go to voicemail. Instead, I focused on finalizing my documentation for the most important meeting of my career, scheduled for 2:00 p.m. that afternoon. Not with Revitalize executives, but with representatives from Madison Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and the World Health Organization. Dr. Kwan, the sharp voice startled me from my preparations. Richard Harlow stood in the doorway of my lab, his face flushed with anger. What have you done? I looked up calmly. Currently, I'm preparing for a meeting about global access to life-saving medications. But I assume you're referring to the Lancet article. This is a direct violation of your employment contract and confidentiality agreements, he sputtered. We'll sue you into oblivion. Everything in that article is factually accurate and independently verifiable, I replied. But you're welcome to explain to a jury why you attempted to remove the actual inventor from her own research project. The research belongs to Revitalize, he insisted. We funded it. Partially, I agreed, after repeatedly cutting our budget and almost shutting us down 3 times. But more importantly, my broader molecular patent was filed based on work I did before joining Revitalize, which gives me certain rights you can't simply erase. His face darkened. The board has called an emergency meeting. You're suspended pending investigation. That's your prerogative, I said, gathering my materials. But you might want to consider a different approach. My meeting with MSF and WHO this afternoon could determine whether Revitalize maintains any role in the global distribution of this treatment. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. What meeting? What are you talking about? I'm discussing a licensing arrangement that would allow generic manufacturing of the broader class of molecules covered by my patent. not just RVT 773, but several variants that are equally effective and would circumvent Revitalize's specific patent. The implication was clear. While Revitalize owned the rights to the specific compound we had developed, my broader patent could open the door to similar treatments that would shatter their monopoly. You destroy billions in shareholder value over a credit dispute? He asked incredulously. This isn't about credit, Dr. Harlow. It's about access. Revitalize plans to price this treatment beyond the reach of most patients who need it. I won't allow my work to save only the wealthy. Before he could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed the CEO's name. With a final glare in my direction, he answered and walked away. My meeting with MSF and WHO representatives went exactly as planned. I presented not only the scientific basis for the treatment, but also a framework for licensing my patent to generic manufacturers in exchange for a modest royalty that would be reinvested in further research. By the time I returned to Revitalize, the company was in crisis mode. The stock had dropped 23% on news that their exclusive control of the Geller's treatment was in jeopardy. An emergency board meeting had been called, and Richard Harlow had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. I was immediately ushered into a meeting with the CEO, the head of legal, and 3 board members. Dr. Kwan, began CEO Sharon Miller, her tone carefully measured. We find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. I'd call it an entirely preventable one, I replied calmly. For the next hour, I laid out exactly what had transpired over the past 3 years, my groundbreaking research, Harlow's systematic appropriation of my work, and the lengths I had gone to document everything while still fulfilling my obligations to Revitalize. What exactly do you want? Asked Thomas Reardon, the lead board member. 3 things, I said without hesitation. First, scientific recognition as the primary developer of RVT 773. Second, a pricing structure that makes the treatment accessible to all Geller's patients, not just the wealthy or well-insured. And third, establishment of a research ethics committee with actual enforcement power to prevent this from happening to other scientists here. And if we refuse? Asked the head of legal. Then I proceed with my licensing arrangement with generic manufacturers. Revitalize faces years of patent litigation while watching its market share erode, and the scientific community learns exactly how this company treats its researchers. Or, I added, we could work together to save lives, maintain reasonable profits, and set a new standard for ethical pharmaceutical development. The negotiations lasted well into the night, but by morning, a framework had been established. Revitalize would acknowledge me as the primary researcher and developer of RVT 773. The treatment would be priced on a sliding scale, with significant discounts for lower-income countries and patient assistance programs in the U.S. Most importantly, I would head a new division focused on neurological treatments with guaranteed research funding and explicit protections for scientific attribution and ethical development practices. 1 week later, Revitalize called another press conference. This time, I stood at the podium, explaining the science behind RVT 773 with the precision and depth that comes from having actually developed it. Seated behind me was the company's leadership team, minus Richard Harlow, who had been quietly asked to resign after an internal review confirmed his systematic misrepresentation. The breakthrough in treating Geller's syndrome isn't just a victory for science, I told the assembled press. It's an opportunity to demonstrate that life-saving treatments can be both profitable and accessible. That we can honor the contributions of researchers while still meeting our obligations to shareholders. And most importantly, that no one should be denied care because they can't afford it. The announcement of Revitalize's new pricing model, alongside my clear description of the scientific journey, generated headlines worldwide. The company's stock, after an initial drop, rebounded to reach new highs as investors recognized that sustainable ethical practices could actually enhance long-term value. 6 months later, as the first Geller's patients began receiving treatments around the world, I received a letter from a 12-year-old girl in Malaysia whose family had access through our global affordability program. Dear Dr. Kwan, she wrote, yesterday I could not hold a pencil. Today I am writing you this letter myself. My neurologist says that in 3 months I might be able to play football again. Thank you for not giving up. I framed the letter and hung it in my new office, where it serves as a daily reminder of what's truly at stake in our work. Beside it hangs a simple plaque that I insisted be placed in every revitalized research facility. Behind every medical breakthrough are the researchers whose names history may forget, but whose dedication changes lives. May we honor their work by ensuring it reaches all who need it. Richard Harlow has largely disappeared from the pharmaceutical industry, though I occasionally see his name attached to consultancy roles at smaller firms. The journalist who first questioned his expertise, Lydia Chen, won a prestigious award for her investigation into credit appropriation in scientific research. As for me, I now lead a team of 30 researchers, each of whom has their contributions meticulously documented and acknowledged. We've developed 2 additional treatments based on the original molecular platform, both priced according to our accessibility commitment. Sometimes, when I'm working late in the lab, still my favorite place despite my executive title, I reflect on what might have happened if I hadn't prepared so thoroughly, documented so meticulously, protected my work so carefully. How many Geller's patients would have been denied treatment they couldn't afford? How many researchers would have continued to see their work claimed by others? The true breakthrough, I've realized, wasn't just the molecular structure I sketched on that coffee shop napkin years ago. It was the recognition that scientific innovation doesn't exist in a vacuum, that its value lies not just in discovery, but in accessibility, not just in corporate ownership, but in human impact. And sometimes, ensuring that impact requires being as methodical in protecting your work as you are in conducting it. Because the most important element in any scientific formula isn't listed in the periodic table. It's the courage to stand up for the truth, even when powerful interests would prefer you remain invisible.